Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today are a couple of the new plastic winter Fallschirmjaeger from Warlord Games. They are a wonderful kit, really easy to stick together, and I was thoroughly impressed by just how smooth they were, how little work it was to get them off the frame and assembled. But importantly, painting them. Now, you don't necessarily have to have all of you guys covered in camo for them to look the part. So rather than covering camouflage for Fallschirmjaeger, which I have already done, I figured let's stick to the winter uniforms and give you some ideas of how you can get these on the table really quickly and then take it a little bit further. So there's kind of two stages to this video here. Now, all of the paints will be listed in the description below, so let's get started. So once your miniatures are assembled, first thing to do is to hit them with a primer spray. Now I've used here White Scar from Citadel. I've reached for matte white from the army painter, but unfortunately my can had run out without me noticing, so White Scar instead it is. Point being, any white will do the job here. Now while we are painting a couple of different uniform styles, some things are going to be universal across those. And one of those, of course, is going to be the skin. Now I'm starting here with a base coat. This is Cadian Fleshtone from Citadel, and continuing the long tradition of me painting skin differently in almost every video, this is what we're going to start with here. The white primer is going to be really handy for this. And my fella is falling off his cork. Now here you could leave the entire uniform in white. If you want him to have a complete snowsuit, then go ahead. It would be technically accurate, so knock yourself out. But what I'm going to do is leave the padded trousers in white, and I'm going to paint the reverse side of the jacket on this fella. Now these were a grayish, sort of mousy gray on the other side. So what I have here is castle gray from Army Painter. Now this is quite similar. If you ever have to find it, stone gray is close, but a little, I'd say a little bit more green than this is. They're described as, and they normally look like a mousy kind of grey on one side. So it's relatively simple. The Fanatic line covers very well. But one quick thing to think about, when it comes to the cuffs, try and leave them white. Reason being, because these jackets were reversible, the cuffs and the hood, when they were worn inside out, would be the opposite colours. So on this fella here, because I'm painting in his jacket, we'll leave the cuff and the hood white, and once that guy is done, what I'll do is the opposite on this chappy here by painting in his cuffs with that castle grey and his hood. Now it is worth pointing out, if you want to, you can actually paint these in the Fallschirmjaeger camo patterns. They were issued in quite a few different styles. I have done a painting guide on that particular pattern before, so I'll link to that in the description because it will work just fine on these jackets. As I mentioned, you can leave these trousers white, same as the padded ones, but let's go ahead and give them proper Luftwaffe trousers. So what I'm using here, this is Field Blue, and you'll see straight away it's quite similar to Field Grey with that greenish touch. But this is what the Luftwaffe ground troops were wearing. Now there is another color out there called Luftwaffe uniform, and it is much more blue. That's more for your ground crews and such like that. This is what these guys would have been wearing in the field. Well, I say that, they would also quite likely have ended up wearing field grey, the greenish color as well. If you broke your trousers, you wore what was available. However, since it looks cool, we'll make sure and give him the correct blue trousers, as it were. And obviously, while I'm doing this, the other fella who isn't wearing a helmet, he's wearing a field cap, I will paint in the same blue. Then with that done, we're on back to some of the sort of general purpose colors. So what I have here is beige brown. I'm going to go all over the rifle, any wooden details like stocks and entrenching tool handles, that sort of thing. Give them a quick blast of this now. As well, particularly on your rifles, any bits which are going to be black, just go straight over the top of them now. Now while we're painting weapons, weapon straps, and the straps on his helmet here, I'm going to paint this as German camo black brown. And I might do this off screen. But weapon slings also be the same color. And they're a little easier to reach. Then we can move on to any of the black parts, or parts that are going to be just off black. So what I'm using here, this is German gray. And this is my go-to for black that isn't quite. So I like to paint in weapons like the MP40 here. I'm also going to paint in the metalwork on the Kar 98K with this. I'll also paint in the leather straps on his webbing. I'm going to use a slightly smaller brush for that. And Fallschirmjaeger boots were black as well. This chap, I'm also going to paint in his helmet with it. That part always seems to bring them together quite a bit. Now what I've got here, these MP40 stick magazine pouches on the side, they would quite commonly be in black leather as well. But also there was quite a proliferation of canvas versions. So I've got here khaki. You could also use German camo beige, medium gray, any khaki canvas sort of color. So I'm going to paint these in, and I'm also going to use this to paint in the bread bags. Now, the covers on the water bottles are actually quite interesting because these were made from a felt material. I'm using here, this is US Field Drab, but these would range from quite dark all the way up to an almost beige sort of color. So there isn't a single correct one here. These were intended that you could dip the entire thing into running water and it would cool the water inside down, which is kind of cool. Not sure how well it would have worked. I guess it would have worked, but there you have it. That's what these were for. Then finally, I think the mess tins. What I have here, this is camo olive green. Again, there were quite a few variations on this. You could use German camo dark green, olive gray. Any of the dark army man greens will work just fine. Once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is cruise back around the miniature. I've got a couple of white bits I need to tidy up. If there's any glaring bits of a base coat showing through, I'll tidy those as well, and then they'll be ready to shade. Now, while you might be tidying up any white bits, it's also a good opportunity to dot in some of the eagles on the field caps. Now, once you're satisfied that your cleanup is done, it's time to shade these guys. And I'll put that fella somewhere I don't keep knocking him. For this, I'm going to use Sonic Tonic, or Marine Juice Mark III, whatever you want to call it. This is a nearly universal wash mix, and the idea is that it's going to give us plenty of shading without overpowering the white and some of the lighter colors. You can also use something like Strong Tone and just thin it down. I do recommend whatever you use, thin it. But what this is a bottle each of Lamian Medium, Reikland Fleshshade, and Dark Tone from the Army Painter. And it gives us a slightly warm brown shade, which won't completely drench everything once it dries. Now, it looks dreadful going on. Don't get me wrong. Like, you'll get to this point and go, oh dear. But once it dries, it is going to look a little more subtle. Make sure you're shifting it around so that it gets into all of the recesses, and any big clumps, don't settle for that. So, making sure I hit everything. And once I'm satisfied with this, I'll take them outside, let them dry in the sun for about half an hour. We'll see what we get then. And then, as if by magic, there we have it. Now, I hope that demonstrates why thinning your shades is going to give you a better result than just slodging them straight on. Whether you use my mix or something else, thin them out. It will work much better. From here, you can just base them up, chuck them on the table, but we'll push the boat out a little bit with some highlights. I have some white scar, and what I'm going to do is just a few little lines here and there on the back of his sleeves and up on his shoulders, just to make some of these highlights a little more precise. You don't want to go overboard with these because then he'll look shiny by comparison, but just a few bits. Now for the padded trousers, don't drive yourself mad individually highlighting the checks. Just get a little bit of white on a raggedy old brush and lightly flick along there until you get a slightly brighter finish. Now for the grey side of the jackets, what you can do is mix just a little bit of white into your base colour. But Army Painter also does Great Hall Grey, which is designed as one of the highlight colors in the gray range. So what I'm going to do, funnily enough, just a few little lines of this. Most of what I'm using here, this is one of the Army Painter Regiment brushes. The size of the brush is not as important as the tip it will keep. Like if your brush will keep a tip while you're painting, so much better than just going automatically for the tiniest brush you can find. Now, highlighting the field blue is a little bit trickier because there isn't really a single straight color to step up to. So what I've got here is a mix. This is about 3 parts of the field blue to 2 parts stone gray. Now I really like stone gray for these slightly worn military uniforms because it looks a little more natural, like they've been washed, worn, and just faded a little bit in the sun versus still having a lot of blue to it. But you can mix in another gray if you fancy. I just think that's the one that looks quite good. So I'm going to highlight the blue here and also on the cap on the other fella. Okay, what I'm going to do now is to highlight the faces. You can leave them as they are if you're looking to paint an army very quickly. I'm going to go over here with some fresh Cadian Fleshtone, and I want to leave just a little of the shaded stuff in the recesses. Now that will barely show up on camera. It is actually quite subtle in reality as well, but it's a good one to do if you are looking to smooth out some of that shading effect. I think it's a good step. I'm going to move to Kislev flesh now, and now we're going to do the usual of highlighting his nose, cheekbones, his chin, and so forth. You could leave it there, but like I said, I like painting faces. So I have thinned down a little bit of Reikland Fleshshade, about half and half, with some Lamian medium, because this will add a little bit more warmth to the skin tone. So I'm going to pop this over his face, and don't forget his little hands and fingies. Now that hasn't quite dried in his eye sockets, but I'm not too fussed. What I'm going to move to now is Flayed one Flesh, and this is going to be our last little spot of highlighting. We can go back to his chin, his knuckles, and his nose, that sort of thing again. Then what you can do, on your palette, water down some white. About half and half water, maybe a little bit more. You want it to be quite runny. And once you're satisfied with it, just blorp it straight over the top of the helmet. Now it's going to be a little bit glorpy, and it will cover relatively well, probably a little bit better than you might want. But just flick that around a couple of times. Don't worry if you miss like the front there. Now don't worry if it is quite white. What's more important is that the coverage is uneven. Because what I'm going to do now, I've got a little bit of packing foam and some fresh German grey. What we'll do is just lightly dab at corners and edges to get a slightly dinged up, worn appearance to our helmet. Now once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is hit him with a varnish. I'm going to use Instar's Varnish Plus, as I regularly recommend. A good matte varnish is worth its weight in gold. And then I will base them up according to my usual winter basing scheme. So I'll link to that in the description. Let's get a look at this fella once he is all finished. So there at last, our Fallschirmjaeger are complete. Now one thing I should have mentioned is that I have gone back with a little bit of 2B pencil and just buffed along the edge of the metalwork on the weapons, and on one of the belt buckles too. Just enough that it shines a little bit when it catches the light the right way, but it doesn't look, it's still black. Easy to do, should have mentioned it, but oops, we skipped over that part. Now all the same, these were really easy to do, and I do hope that there are a couple of points there where you've seen that you could leave them and have a nice looking army, but it doesn't take a lot of extra effort to really bump them up just a little bit further. In particular, I like painting faces. Maybe that's me, but they're a really good way to add a bit more character to your force. So again, thank you very much to Warlord for letting me have a few of these guys, really appreciate it. And as well, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. Really mean it. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.